And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forum. I am Daren, Jaime. We thank you for joining us. Now, if you're asking the question, what is the show all about? We bring you a forum discussing and providing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities that many communities face. Issues such as systemic inequalities to pressing social problems. Our guests provide multiple perspectives and insights, helping us better understand and address these challenges. So we invite you to stay connected to us. The Social Justice Forum starts now. And welcome back. Peace Action New York State is an organization that's dedicated to advocating for peace as well as challenging militarism both at home and abroad. It works tirelessly to influence U.S. foreign policy towards diplomacy and human needs and coordinates statewide actions to bring about New York's voice to the national stage. And joining me now, we've got the executive director at Peace Action New York State, Emily Rubino. And Emily, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Glad to have you sharing with us. And as we talk about the organization, a grassroots organization that really is with peace at the forefront. When you look at the climate today, obviously you got your work cut out for you.
We certainly do. So never a shortage of work to be done.
And when we talk about that work, I really want to have an opportunity to talk about peace as you see it. As from the organization's perspective, how do you break down the struggle for peace right now?
It's definitely a hard one to break down. I think the way we look at it is if we're working on any one aspect of working towards peace, which we see as not just the absence of war, right, but really peace and justice going hand in hand. If we can, attack even just one part of that, we're helping unravel kind of this larger military-industrial complex that we're dealing with that really infiltrates our lives in so many ways.
Yeah. And when we talk about part of your initiative, I know you want to really tackle military spending and really seeing a curvature of that. How do we curb military spending from your perspective, given the fact that we are in wartime?
Yeah, that's a great question and one that we definitely get a lot. I think what people need to understand about the US military budget is that it is absolutely massive. It is larger than the next 10 countries combined. Over half of our discretionary budget is directly for the military and military programs. The latest National Defense Authorization Act that the Senate has passed has a top line budget of over 900 billion, which is just an absurd amount of money. So if we were even to cut just a fraction of that, say 10%, that is money that we could be using towards domestic programs, towards education, towards housing, towards infrastructure, and towards combating climate change and doing things that actually make us safe and proactively are working for our safety and security in a way that spending this money on, military programs and just giving it to the Pentagon and defense contractors is not doing. The budget is extremely bloated, and cutting these amounts won't affect our ability to defend ourselves or do anything like that. So I think that's really important, that perspective of just how completely outsized our military budget is compared to other countries, in talking about cutting it or moving that money towards where we think it's better suited and needed.
Yeah. So you have this Move the Money campaign. I want you to share a little bit with our viewers about the Move the Money campaign and what you're aiming here. I know it's along the same lines.
Yes, it is. So the Move the Money campaign is a coalition that we're part of. We're not the only member, but we're one of them, that focuses on a New York City Council resolution that calls upon the federal government and its legislators to move significant funds away from the military budget to fund human needs, as I was just talking about. And it also calls for in-depth public hearings to be conducted on the dollar amounts that the city needs, but that's getting diverted to the Pentagon instead. So this is a bill that's really about educating the city, talking about where our tax dollars are going, and talking about the needs of our city and where those could be better spent. So it's a bill in the New York City Council, and it's a campaign that you can get involved in. There's a Move the Money campaign website that I encourage people to check out.
And I know you spent time lobbying and really talking with lawmakers when it comes to these particular issues. What response are you getting from lawmakers when it comes to military spending and how we're really engaged and entrenched at this point?
That's a great question. I think it really depends on the office. I think some are more willing to talk about Pentagon accountability and talk about the waste we might be able to cut without actually affecting things like salaries of service members or benefits to veterans or anything like that, but just, really examining the bloat in our military budget, a lot of which is caused by these exclusive contracts with military contractors that are just inventing their own prices for things like nails or toilets or things and charging just absolutely obscene amounts for these things. So I think that educating members about the waste in our Pentagon budget, the fact that it's not really going to affect the effectiveness of our military or pay or anything like that is really important. Um, but I think also just talking about again the fact that our budget is larger than the next 10 countries combined, and if um, we're diverting all of our attention to this budget and not towards things like being prepared for the next big pandemic or combating the climate crisis, then we're really not investing in safety and security.
Yeah.
So, yeah, some offices are more willing to engage in that message than others, but it really is not a partisan issue. It's something that across the board, I think any member should be able to talk about is using our tax dollars wisely.
Yeah. When we talk about war, obviously the opposite of that is diplomacy. And having the opportunity to engage in diplomacy, I know that your organization really speaks to addressing the issue of diplomacy and then more so, cooperation and putting these two concepts together and really creating public awareness. When we look at diplomacy, really hard these days when you look at the several, countries that are at it and more with, and on the verge of really going to war. How do you get to a place where we can promote diplomacy in the face of all that's happening right now?
That's a great question. I think people see diplomacy sometimes as something that's naive or unrealistic, or it's kind of a tool in the toolbox, but not the first one or not the primary one. And I think we really want to emphasize that what we need always is conversation and understanding. We need a diplomacy first approach. We're not going to solve our issues by bombing countries or arming countries to bomb other countries. What solves, problems and gets us to a point of mutual understanding is diplomacy, is having hard conversations and being able to get to a place where we can see what our common interests are. So it's not always easy. And I think that we're also not investing enough in diplomacy. Going back to the military budget, we're certainly not investing enough in the State Department or in being able to facilitate conversations and dialogue across countries that are at war or that are disagreeing, which is, it's really hard to do in this climate. There's a lot of distrust between countries. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that we might not know about. But we need to, I think, really stress that war is not the answer, and it's also not going to solve any of these problems. So I think we really need to talk about where we can work cooperatively towards issues that affect the entire globe instead of, kind of treating each country as isolated or not part of this larger global community that will be affected by things like pandemics, like the climate crisis. It's things that we really need to work together on. So I don't have the magic answer, but I think that just facilitating conversation and being able to have open lines of communication so there's no misunderstanding or miscalculation on part is really important to make sure that we don't have even more wars.
If you had the answer, you would not be on my channel. We'd be doing like live, and I'd be like right there. Because whoever has the answer to world peace, really, the truth of the matter is, it's a hard topic. But I do understand a couple of things. Number one is that you have to be on the defense given the fact of what's going on. And at the same time, some things can be viewed as extreme in the face of what's going on. But I do want to go back to one statistic that I read, which is by the year 2046, estimated about $2 to $3 trillion is going to be spent in weapons escalation. Particularly when it comes to nuclear armament. How are we looking at this and your perspective on this here? Because when we look at, this nuclear escalation. It's definitely happening, and it's happening across the world. But the United States is definitely at the forefront of this nuclear escalation, and we are projecting probably by 2046 to see trillions of dollars thrown that way.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the nuclear piece is really important. Peace Action New York State was actually founded out of the joining of two different Cold War era anti nuclear campaigns, the Movement for a Sane Nuclear Policy and the Nuclear Freeze campaign. That became Sane Freeze. Sane Freeze became Peace Action. So advocating for nuclear abolition or nonproliferation has really been at the heart of what we've done all along. And it's more urgent now than ever, right? Like you said, the amount of spending on nuclear modernization or on nuclear weapons programs overall is just absolutely unfathomable. Like, I can't imagine trillions. But it's also really, really dangerous for us to be upgrading these weapons or even just having them or threatening to use them or allowing other countries to threaten to use them is just inexcusable. We're part of global anti nuclear campaigns, and a lot of them work directly with uh, the victims of the atomic bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They're called Hibakusha. And they have made it their life's mission to make sure that no one has to experience the horrors that they did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we engage in nuclear disarmament efforts in a range of ways. We advocate for a no first use policy for the United States, which basically just says that we will not instigate, like we will not launch a nuclear attack first. If another country were to attack us back, that would be different. But a no first use campaign is not even something we have now. We also advocate for campaigns that kind of take a more integral approach, like the Back from the Brink campaign, which is nationwide, taking different steps to get us to nuclear abolition. We're a partner of ICANN, which is the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. They won the Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago for their work in helping develop the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is a UN treaty that works to abolish nuclear weapons. And, we also support current disarmament treaties like the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the New START Treaty, things like that, that the nuclear powers are currently in, to make sure that we're not heightening a nuclear escalation or making sure that we don't have a nuclear war. There's a thing called the Doomsday Clock that the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists puts out, and they have it currently set as 90 seconds to midnight, which is not a lot of time, metaphorically, right? 90 seconds, they say, is I think maybe the closest we've ever been to nuclear catastrophe. And it's because of all of these tensions. And if we continue to invest money in these weapons that we claim can never be used again, we are just throwing money away and also making the world a less safe place.
If you give me a moment, I really want to just take a moment to just congratulate the work that's being done, because I think it's important to have conversations about things that are so pertinent, because we're really talking about, our public safety. And while we've got so many things going on, your organization has been at the forefront of being a critical voice for articulating these things and saying that, yes, we do need to talk about de-escalation. We do need to talk about how we handle conflict and conflict resolution. We do need to talk about military spending. But if we really are honest, on the day-to-day basis, Americans deal with the economy, Americans deal with quality of life issues, Americans deal with a whole lot of other things. And the question comes to mind, how much will we have conversations about foreign policy and foreign affairs and things of this, matters of war? Is the public really becoming more and more engaged? Because as your work as an advocate, you're speaking to lawmakers, but yet and still you also have another job, which is speaking to the public to heighten up their awareness. So I want to get that question about the awareness component. Are you finding that the public is really aware of a lot of stuff that we're talking about right here, or are we just so busy with what's going to happen in November, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening across the world, that maybe we're not really too dialed in on some of the real key facts here?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think public awareness is extremely important. I think that a lot of what we do is seek to educate folks on the connections between our issues, on the way that foreign policy is, delicately intertwined to our domestic issues. When we're talking about the economy and issues around underfunded programs, domestic programs that can't, take place or that we're told there's no money for, it's directly because we spend so much money on the military. It's that, hundreds of billions of dollars that we're spending on the military that means that folks are in worse financial shape here. And also, I think, you know, I think that budgets can be moral documents. And I think that when we're saying we are willing to spend this much money on weapons, on war, but we're not willing to spend it on things that actually improve the quality of lives for people who live here, that speaks volumes, right? And there's also direct ties between the military and, issues we talk about with policing or other things like that. The Pentagon has the 1033 program that gives extra weapons to, local police forces that are then used against protesters and activists here within the United States as well. I also think, especially in New York, but also across the country, we're a diverse country. There are folks who have family all over, and a lot of the folks come here or have family that are directly affected by U.S. militarism abroad. So I think it's important both to educate people about these connections. And I think also since Israel has started its war in Gaza, we've seen a new increased public awareness of what's going on and what the U.S. is doing abroad, and who we're supplying arms to, how much money we're funneling in terms of aid and support to other countries for military operations, and we're directly complicit in human rights atrocities and violations abroad, and that's, I think, deeply upsetting to people on a moral level in a way that I don't think we've seen since maybe, I don't think we've seen this kind of concern around foreign policy in the U.S. wars since perhaps the lead up to the war in Iraq. So I think there is a lot of young people right now who are really paying attention and caring about what's going on, but we always need to be expanding who we're reaching and kind of explaining that foreign policy and peace and diplomacy and nuclear weapons issues are directly related to the things we care about domestically. I am relatively young. I was not around. I was born, towards the end of the Cold War. I don't really have memories of ducking and covering under my desk or things like that. But I think we forget that the threat of nuclear war is just as real as it was then, if not more. And it's not something that we have time to think about every day. But it's important for us to, I think, remember that this is a huge existential threat along with the climate crisis, and it's something that could really end life as we know it. So I think it's really important for us to bring these issues to the forefront and not discount the other things that people are concerned about, because sometimes you really are just trying to get by day to day, and that's what you need to do. But just talking about the ways that this kind of fits into that, and that these issues directly feed into the problems that we're seeing people face on a regular basis.
Yeah. Emily, I got to leave it there, but I will agree with you that I think there's a conversation that needs to continue to be had. There's a lot of public awareness that is going on by way of young people today because, very simply, they are concerned about their future. And so big shout out to you for the work that you're doing and really continue to do it because much needed. And there's so many issues out there, but to look at a global stage and see the impact that's going on. But I think we all were introduced to war front and center. If you've been around here, recently, 9/11 was war right here on our turf. So it's something that you do have to pay attention to, something that you do have to guard against, but something that we have to also be mindful of and also raise our voice too. Thanks so much for being with us, Emily.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
All righty. Taking a quick break. Guess what? We will have more on this Social Justice Forum right after this. Stay with us. We're coming right back. And welcome back. The National Center for Law and Economic Justice is a group of advocates and lawyers that have been fighting for over 5 decades, ensuring that economic, racial, and disability justice are within reach for all individuals and families. Now, they leverage high-impact litigation, policy advocacy, and grassroots support to tackle systemic barriers and drive meaningful change. Joining me now to share more is the Executive Director at the National Center for Law and Economic Justice. We thank Dennis Parker for being with us, and good to have you here with us.
My pleasure to be here.
Thank you. The work is steady, huh?
It's steady and growing. There are a lot of the problems we face are ones that are increasing, and actually I was interested in the overlap between the previous conversation. We face deficits in budgets for a lot of the basic services for survival, and a lot of what we do is fighting to assure that survival and the opportunity to thrive.
Yeah, and having those services and having that money there to be able to do that is really of critical nature. When we talk about litigation and the work that you're doing with litigation, there's a lot of stuff out there that's needed for justice, and justice comes in so many different ways. And I, often ask people what social justice is, and they say, I can go on and on and on. But from your perspective, when you talk about justice, how do you see it?
Well, litigation is just one tool of achieving justice, and justice is making sure that everyone has an equal opportunity, has the basics that they need to survive. We use litigation that affects, in many cases, hundreds of thousands of people to make sure that they're able to feed their families, for example. When we're one of the things that we face all over the country, and we have cases from Alaska to New York, although 40% of our work is here in New York City. But we find that even the basic things like being able to feed your family, there are barriers like the offices that are supposed to administer programs being understaffed, or the only way you could apply is through a telephone call where you wait online for as long as 1 or 2 days to even reach another person. And in the meantime, your family is starving. And so we want to make sure that people aren't starving. We want to make sure that if you work, that you get a fair wage. We want to make sure that you live in a safe environment. We want to make sure that you have the opportunity that is your right. And so we try to take steps to make that possible. And we work with the people who are most affected as largely lawyers, although we have people who do outreach to communities and things like that. We work for our clients. We are not the ones who are determining what needs to be done. We speak to them, they tell us, and we try to help them to do it.
Yeah, we talk about high-end litigation, and there's a high-impact litigation, I should say, and there's some high-impact litigation that's out there. When I look at what's going on right now, and you talk about justice as litigation is a form of justice, sometimes litigation is the only way that you can get somebody to the table to even achieve justice.
It is one tool that can do that, but I want to emphasize that, if you look at the civil rights movement, litigation was part of it, but a lot of the advances that were made were what was going on in the streets and in communities. And so I don't want to take more credit than we as lawyers deserve. But it's difficult, and it's a ponderous system. We have cases we've been working on for 10, 20 years. And we're still in court, and we're still monitoring, and we're still fighting. We have cases against the New York City Housing Authority and mold remediation that has been going on. And in the meantime, there are children who are exposed to mold. There are asthma rates that are astronomical in New York, worse than they are in just about any other part of the world, and that shouldn't be happening in this center of wealth.
Yeah, it's a lot. As we look at some of the things that are going on in society right now, I know that one of the things that I can really lay hold on is that of the disabled community. There's been tremendous ground that's been, made and traction made in disability rights. From your perspective, let's talk about that for a moment, disability rights and how you see things.
Disability rights is a large part of what we do, and there has been a lot of progress, but there's still progress to be made. A lot of our work comes from the fact that disabled people cannot get equal access to the benefits that we're fighting for, and that the agencies that oversee these programs don't make the accommodations that are necessary. And part of the problem isn't that there aren't laws, because there are a multitude of anti-discrimination against people with a disability laws, but they're not being followed and they're not being enforced. A lot of what we do is enforcing clear law. Now, we try to change law too, but there's a big gap still between what people are entitled to by law and what they get. And we're trying to reduce or eliminate that gap.
Yeah. Employment discrimination, also of a huge note these days too?
It's an enormous problem now, and I think the pandemic really heightened it. We talked about essential workers, people who we rely on for our continued existence. And very often those people were people who were underpaid, who didn't have access to medical insurance, who were forced to expose themselves to danger so that the rest of us can continue to survive. And there's so many people, we deal with home health care workers, and we depend on them for people with disabilities, for our older relatives, and yet we have a case where people are expected to work 24 hours and they're paid for 12 hours, and that pay is very low. So there's this gap. The people should be allowed to make a living wage when they work full-time, or in the case of some of our clients, multiple jobs, but they're not.
Right. When we find cases of employment discrimination, and we know that's huge, what are pretty much the foundation for this employment discrimination? Because I hear people talk about, there are a lot of cases out there. Are we finding like there's some common themes among employment discrimination?
There are a range of cases. There are cases where there's pretty much express discrimination. Mm-hmm. We have a case now that is Bronx-based of different pay rates for Applebee's in the South Bronx versus Manhattan. And in the South Bronx, where the people who work there are mostly black or brown, they get $10 an hour. And in the areas in like Times Square, where the workers are more white, they get $15 an hour. And so it's hard to come up with an explanation for that. But a part of it is that there are systems that take advantage of groups of people, whether it's agricultural workers, the home health care workers I was talking about, where they are denied benefits, where they are paid less, and where that affects not only them, but their family and their future and their future family. The work we do is intergenerational. It has an impact that will be felt long in the future. And it's one of the reasons why there is still a significant wealth gap between black and brown families and white families. And in some cases, an extraordinary difference. White families having 20 or 30 or 40 times the wealth as a black family. That makes a difference about where you can go to college, where you live, whether you can start a business. And so we're trying to even the playing field.
Yeah. When you have cases of employment discrimination, it's obviously taken a while for it to mature and come to end up on your doorstep, I should say. But on a day-to-day level, people are trying to find out what are my rights and how do I go about really speaking, because sometimes you feel like you're up against that brick wall when it comes to your employer, and you don't want to say anything. You don't want to challenge the system because this is how I live and this is how I survive, and I can't. So what advice do you have, and what can people do when they know they're being exploited in the workforce to really get to a place where they can take some legal action?
We are one of a lot of organizations that deal with fair employment practices, and so reaching out to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Economic Justice Cities, Fair Economy here in New York, us. There are all sorts of people who could tell you what your rights are and can help protect you. In that case I was describing about Applebee's, the person who complained to us, we filed a complaint, and then that person was fired because he filed a complaint. And that violates the law when you retaliate against someone because they oppose a discriminatory practice. So we're representing that person in those cases. You know, we tend not to take individual cases. The overwhelming majority of our case are large number of plaintiffs, but we could guide people to where they can get individual help.
Yeah. You talk about the economy, talk about trying to make it, right? And, you know, we know that the economy is in challenge right now, but low-wage workers are a big reality these days. People who are really dealing with the fact of, you know, being underpaid,
Right.
And exploited. How do you go about dealing with that from a legal perspective?
Well, sometimes we enforce the existing law. Sometimes we move to bring new cases or to create new law. We have an effort going on now called 13 Forward. And as you know, the 13th Amendment, which prohibits slavery, has an exception for people who are incarcerated. And so we are working to end the exploitation of those people by making sure that they're paid a fair wage, or that the kinds of systems where people work for pennies a day are eliminated. We look for things where wealth is being extracted from low-income communities, which tend to be black or brown communities, and we try to end those practices. We've been doing a case up in Buffalo for years, but Buffalo was balancing its city budget by imposing fines and fees on people after there were traffic stops set up in black neighborhoods, and they would charge you a fee for having windows that were too dark, and then give you one for every window, so that you had to pay thousands of dollars. And what we found out is that the budget contained fines and fees that the city passed. So they were using that as a way of raising money, and they were raising that money on the backs of black and brown people. And that happens all over the country in one form or another. So we're fighting to end that. And the one thing that I'd like to say is that the things that are being done to save money by underpaying people, by not providing them benefits, ends up costing us multiple times more later on. So we're hurting people now, and that's important.
Right.
But we're hurting everyone. If you don't fund the opportunity for people to have healthy environments, for people to have access to food, to people to have access for accommodations, that has an impact. You'll be paying more later by higher health costs, incarceration costs, all of these things. So it's a really foolish economy to underpay people now, to not provide safe environments.
Which brings me to the question of, how do you tackle government accountability?
Well, very often in court. I mean, we are maybe most of our work are suing government offices that aren't living up to their responsibilities, where we have cases against the New York State Department of Labor. We have cases against human resources offices in New York City. We have cases against health organizations throughout the country. And we're saying, you need to live up. You are obligated to provide these services, and you're not doing it.
For yourself, what's it like now? Because I know during COVID, we've had this conversation on this platform, another platform of a show that I host, where we talk about court being inundated right now. So much so that almost justice is even more delayed because of COVID and the backlog. For what are you seeing inside the courtroom? Are we seeing any progress? Are you still finding that things are extremely backlogged?
Things are backlogged, but there are other things that you can do, and we find ourselves, a lot is achieved by people doing local organizing, and we urge people to take steps to make sure that their local governments and their state governments are living up to their obligations. And so we've been working with a number of extremely effective organizations that have been putting pressure on on government to respond. And we'll always be there to back them up with a lawsuit if necessary. But you know, you have to recognize there are a lot of ways that you can proceed, and we try to help people find those ways and to offer one option with litigation as well as assistance with legislation and things like that.
What should we, the viewer, be paying attention to these days?
What, I'm sorry?
What should we, the viewer and the public, really be paying attention to these days that we can lend our voice to?
I think that there was a narrative about public benefits for a long time, really started, you know, probably 40 years ago or 50 years ago, that there are welfare queens or people taking advantage of these public benefits. And I think we need to pay attention to the fact that there are these real needs that people have, that these public benefits are safety net programs, and in fact most people don't stay on them for their whole lives, but use the opportunity to get their lives together and then end up being in a better economic situation later on. So we need to be aware of the issues of difficulty in access to public benefits, unfair exploitation of labor, environmental issues that differentially affect communities of color, and that's something that's going to be growing as global warming continues. If you look at who is hit hardest, both in this country and in the world, it is lower income and particularly black and brown communities. And I think, you know, that kind of fairness is something we should be paying attention to, and we don't hear as many discussions as we need to hear about the people who are most harshly affected by what's going on now.
Yeah. We got to leave it there. Dennis Parker, Executive Director, the National Center, I should say, for Law and Economic Justice. Thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be with you.
You got to come back.
I would love to come back.
We have to unpack some more stuff. We can't unpack this all just in a segment like this, so just want to let you know that.
All right, I'll
We'll
be
have to
back.
be back. All right, listen. All right, taking a quick break. Guess what? We'll be back more coming up right after this.
.7% of Bronxites currently experience food insecurity. Meanwhile, instead of these nice, colorful foods, this is the best food that they have access to. If this sounds like you, there are a bunch of resources to get healthy food for free or cheap. If you want to help, you might consider donating or volunteering in one of these places. Community fridges like this one are all over the city, and allow New Yorkers to conveniently donate extra food to people who might need it. Go to this link and find your nearest one. Food banks and pop-up events like these provide millions of healthy meals to families in need. These organizations are distributing meals to Bronxites as we speak, and are always accepting donations and volunteers.
We're gonna start the show right now. This is my favorite part. Ready in 5, 4, 3, 2. Hey, this is Angel, and I am one of the instructors for the in-studio production. Here at BronxNet, we offer classes that can help you elevate, expand, and start your television career. All you have to do is sign up at BronxNet.org/education. For the past 7 years, I have been in various productions, spanning from talk shows, independent films, news reports, art displays, teachings, musical performances, and many more. Ain't that right, Angel? Yeah, you're absolutely right, Angel. There are a lot of creative individuals that we're just waiting to sign up for the class. And if I may, can I also express thank you, Angel. That's all the time we have left. Visit BronxNet.org/education and become a producer by taking the course. The class I offer is also in English, en español y también bilingüe. Nos vemos en la próxima clase.
Hey creative family, my name is Timothy Coleman and I'm the Director of Education here at BronxNet. And I'm standing in BronxNet's Media and Technology Studios in the South Bronx because I want to let you know about an amazing program that we're bringing back that highlights the creativity of community members just like you. Emerging Media Makers is a show that introduces you to BronxNet certified producers. They've taken a step in their creative journey by enrolling in BronxNet's media training classes. On this show, you'll get to see the many ways that our certified producers have created a space that's all their own. Emerging media makers, your passion lives here.
In today's fast-paced and unpredictable world, finding the right strategy to elevate your brand can be a challenge. As businesses navigate the complexities of our current climate, from social justice issues to health crises, standing out and communicating effectively has never been more crucial. Our next guest is a powerhouse in the world of public relations and entrepreneurship. She guides her Brooklyn-based firm to a successful and, purposeful destiny with impactful strategies. And I want to introduce you now the founder and CEO of TJM and Company Media Boutique, Ms. Tiffany Joy Murchison. And thank you, Tiffany, for being with us.
Thank you for having me again.
I'm glad to have you. And I mean, a little different platform, but we got you here, and I'm glad you're sitting here with us because I want to have this conversation about image, right? And we see a lot, I'm trying to say this with a straight face, we see a lot of images that are just like crazy. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that more so in a time such as this is the importance of having that right image. Mm-hmm. And particularly it just affects the way we look, and then it also creates stereotypes and narratives. And so for yourself as a PR person, how do you see image today?
You just made my heart hurt.
Yeah, well.
As I was sitting here listening to the other guests, I was thinking about messaging and how important that concept is just across the board. And you'll hear educators say in elementary school, how do you know a police officer is an officer because he has on a uniform, or a doctor's a doctor because they have on scrubs and a stethoscope. And I always say to my clients, what is your image or your appearance telling people you are, or who are you telling people you are through the image that you have today? We are in a society where we think anything goes. Social media has tricked us into believing that anything goes. But then when you're in the rooms where the big checks are written and when policies are made, anything doesn't go. And the conversations that are being had behind the veil are very different than the conversations we're having out in public.
Yeah. Public relations has the opportunity to really help to form a narrative, to shape a narrative.
Yes.
And unfortunately, when we look at, communities of color, sometimes that narrative isn't always right. But we need those people behind the scenes to be able to help to navigate that. For yourself, talk to us about that. When you look at, and we can look every day, right? Turn on TV and be like, oh, you need to give me a call, right? But the reality is, because sometimes we just blow it.
Yeah, we do. There have been so many times that I have been on television and I'll go on Instagram or Facebook and be like, does anybody know so-and-so? Tell them to give me a call. I go back to the situation that happened with the sister at Harvard, and I posted on LinkedIn a while back, like, I wonder who was informing her outside of the folks at Harvard. That's why people that look like us are so important in the work that we do. There are so many of us now out here helping us shape our narratives and tell our stories, but too oftentimes you see that the biggest voices don't have support that looks like us, and they end up either in hot water or in a mess. If we look at what's going on in our city right now, this morning as I was walking out the door, I was like, man, he needs to give me a call, right? Somebody needs to tell him to call me. But it is important because we are the only ones who can tell our story in a way that resonates and is important and is authentic to us, right? Again, going back to Harvard, I'm sure there were people telling her what to say, but those people were beneficial to Harvard, not to her. Right. And the fallout was on Dr. Gray.
Right. So here you are, this PR executive right now, and doing great work across New York City. But the road here wasn't always easy for yourself.
No, not at all. First of all, just being a black woman in America is difficult. We know that. I think we are like the most hated person in America as a black woman. it was also difficult to prove to people on both sides of the aisle, those that look like me and those that don't, that I knew what I was talking about. In the beginning, I had clients that said, oh yeah, that sounds good. It's nice to have you on the payroll because it looks good for us, but we're really not going to do what you say do. And oftentimes I've sat back and just nodded and had the face to say, I told you so. I do this every day. It's what I live, eat, breathe. I watch the news in the morning. I read news briefings all day long. I have my finger on the pulse of what's happening in pop culture. I have a team behind me that if I miss something, they're telling me what's going on. So whether it's hip hop, whether it's politics, whether it's the economy, we stay in the know. And for us, it's not just what's going on, but it's how that is impacting people that look like us as well. And that's really, really important.
To have that kind of impact is major, right? And I think the work that you do is critical because, as we say, not only does it, shape people's narrative, it helps to shape a narrative, but it also helps to create a voice and helping to find a voice. Talk to me from that perspective because for you, right, I think knowing you for years now, you've kind of like found your voice.
I have.
And
I have.
she's using it too. And the reality, because she didn't want to do this before, right? You wouldn't do this before, but now you've kind of like found your voice, but at the same time, there's others that need to find their voice if they're going to be successful.
So what happened with me was I was comfortable playing the background. And then I realized that wasn't going to work because I needed to tell people why people like me were important, why I need to do what it is that I do and how I do it and who stands behind me when I do it. My faith is very important to me. So being able to speak out and say, this is what we do, this is why we do it. TJM & Co. is where PR meets purpose. We advocate for those who don't have a voice. Most of our clients are in the nonprofit space. And it was important for us to say, they have something to say and we're going to help them say it. And this is how we're going to help them say it. So it is really important. For me to brand myself was extremely important. How can I tell clients that I can brand them when I'm standing in the background and not branding myself? So, but again, being a black woman in America, imposter syndrome is real. There are a lot of competing messages out there that tell us we can and we shouldn't, and we need to just stay in our space, or, we don't need to get paid the same that everybody else gets paid. Talking about social justice, the pay gap is a big problem there. And so it was really hard to demand what my counterparts, white male counterparts, are getting paid to do the same work with the same, if not an even bigger impact.
Yeah, you led into where I was going because there is that inequality there, right?
Absolutely.
And how real is it?
I emceed a Women in Business Summit last week, and the stats, I want to say black women are getting 56 cents on the dollar of their white male counterparts. That's a lot. A black woman in a 40-year career is going to lose $407,000 in salary versus a white male in the same industry or the same job that she's in. That's serious. So when we talk about messaging, what message are you sending to those that look like us to say we're not worth being paid the same thing that someone else is paid that doesn't look like us? That our education, although we pay the same tuition, we got the same degree, our education isn't as valuable or isn't as worth. My experience isn't worth as much as your experience is because I'm a black woman or because I'm a woman. Right now there's an attack on women in this country. And so that's another place where my voice is really necessary. So
how do we close that gap for those persons who are out there watching and saying, listen, you know what, I'm a PR person, or I'm trying to get into PR. I already know what the potential possibly looks like. What can I do to safeguard or to put myself in the best possible position?
So for someone just starting out, I would always say, don't run to entrepreneurship. Right now, we glorify that. It's corny to have a 9-to-5. Everybody thinks entrepreneurship is sitting on the beach with a pina colada, and that is not true, and it is not for the faint at heart. But you need to, I say, pay dues, and you need to understand what structure is like. So go work for a PR company so that you can actually see what happens on the day-to-day. Don't just run out there blind, right? So that's one thing. And for those of you who are, entrepreneurs or have agencies, demand your money. if they're not willing to pay your price, then they're not your customer. But if all of us demanded what we were worth, they'd have no choice but to pay us, because our voice is necessary, our perspective is necessary. The world's not going to continue to go around without our input. I remember it might have been like Taraji, Gabrielle Union, a group of actresses were all offered the same role, and they were being lowballed. And I remember Gabrielle Union saying they each turned it down, and they called each other and said, hey, they just called me and gave me this number and I turned it down. And by the time they got back around to the first one, they had to pay them what they were worth, because everybody stuck together. And so as women, especially women of color, we need to do that. And we need to all make sure that we are demanding the same money, no competition, collaboration. There's enough to go around if we all stick together.
Yeah. Talk about PR in the digital age right now, because we are doing it in a different kind of way, but yet and still it needs to get done.
AI. Folks always say to me, am I scared that AI is going to take my job away? And I tell them AI has never been a black woman in America. So AI can't give you what I can give you. What we have done is found how it can support us in terms of churning out, say, social content or digital content quicker. Nothing goes out without being read over and tweaked and things of that nature. So we use it as a tool, but it's definitely not a replacement. You do also have to be very careful with clients, because people are creating fake news and fake bots and deep fakes and videos. And I'm consistently having to say to people, you do understand that clips are being cut up, things are being added on top of it. AI is able to layer bodies and voices and all that type of stuff. So you have to be really, really careful. We keep a close eye on any media that comes out about our clients so that we can make sure that it is true. You know, those alerts are going off daily, all day, because there's just so much more that you have to pay attention to and watch over to mitigate any crises in this new culture.
Yeah. And, you know, how much does relationship matter in this business?
Relationships are everything. But I think that's in life in general. I can do PR in finance, I can do PR in pharma, I can do PR in nonprofit. The skill sets are transferable. It's the relationships that I have in each area that are important, so that I can pick up the phone and say, hey, Daren, I have a client that is talking about XYZ and I think it would be a good match for your show. Or I can call a reporter at the New York Post and do the same thing. That's why relationships are so, so important, because there's so much information out there and so many people competing for the attention of the public. And your relationships are what gonna help you weed through that noise.
Yeah. So you made a decision a long time ago to move from corporate, I wouldn't say a long time ago, but it was a while ago, right? To move from corporate into this entrepreneurship of being you know, having your own PR company here. Talk to me about that, because there's so many people right now who are, you know, in a place, in a space where they say, I'm unsatisfied with working that corporate job, right? And we're seeing a lot more in communities of color ditch the corporate job and say, I'd rather try this on my own than rely on you for my check.
Right. So I always tell people it wasn't really my choice. God kicked me out of corporate America 3 times actually before I would listen. And the 3rd time I was like, okay, this must not be where I should be, right? And I ventured out into entrepreneurship. It is not, again, for the faint at heart. I'm grateful for the years that I did work in corporate, because I learned the importance of policies and structure. Any small business needs those things, right? Any micro business, small business can have up to 500 employees. The majority of entrepreneurs who are people of color operating with 1 or 2 employees. We don't have a whole staff, right? So one, learn that you can't be the bottle washer, the cook, the baker, the candlestick maker. You can't do all the things. You're going to have to outsource if you want to scale and grow. Start with bartering with other businesses in your neighborhood, right? So I remember needing to brush up on my Spanish. There was a young lady who taught Spanish and needed some PR, and we bartered. I had Spanish lessons and we did her press releases and some media for her, and it worked out really well. find someone that you can barter with initially, and together you'll grow. Support other small businesses, pay them like they need to be paid and when they should be paid, because that is important. We, in the Black community, are one of the few communities who does not resonate that they're going to support each other regardless. And that's where a lot of the power lies, is that other communities are insular first, and then they go outside of the community if they can't find what they need inside, right? We don't think of it that way. I think it's 6 minutes the Black dollar stays in the community, if it's even that anymore. And we have other communities where their dollars stay in 30 days, right? And so we need to learn how to do that. And the way that you do that as an entrepreneur is you pay it forward, right? So I support other Black-owned businesses or other women-owned businesses as much as I can. And it gets reciprocated. I get referrals, I get other business, because I am pouring into the community that can pour back into me. So as an entrepreneur, you need to find your tribe.
Yeah. And how hard was that for you?
It was a little difficult in the beginning because I think I was one of the few people in my circle to venture out first, right? But now it's easier and easier as more and more women and more people of color are starting their own businesses.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you out there in the field representing, and great to
Thank
have you
you.
sitting across from me.
Thank you.
All righty. Well, we want to let you know, listen, we come to the end of our show. Before that, how do people get, if they want to get
TJM and Co. across everything. So Instagram, LinkedIn, our website, tjmandco.com. You can find us everywhere.
I want to be fair. I couldn't let you leave without doing that. All right. Well, now I can tell you we come to the end of our show. Hope that you enjoyed this week's discussion on the social justice forums. Now, if you're rewatching this week's edition, catch Recablecast right here on BronxNet.org. Now, if you want to join in on the conversation, as always, and if you want to present your point of view, go to our social media page at BronxNet TV. Join us next week. We continue to elevate the discussion and bring further awareness across the globe. I'm your host, Daren Jaime, saying take care. God bless.